Hey everyone, it's your boy Trevor, back with another one. Today, we're diving headfirst into the US-China trade war, a topic that's been making headlines for years now. This isn't just about economics, it's about power, politics, and the future of global trade. The US-China trade war is a complex and multifaceted conflict that has affected not just these two superpowers, but the entire world. From tariffs to technology bans, the stakes are incredibly high. Buckle up, because this roller coaster ride of tariffs and trade disputes is far from over. The ups and downs have been dizzying, with each side trying to outmaneuver the other. Let's rewind back to 2018, shall we? This is when the trade war officially kicked off, setting the stage for years of economic turbulence. Trump, with his signature swagger, slapped tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. His administration argued that these measures were necessary to protect American industries and intellectual property. His mission? To shrink the trade deficit and bring back manufacturing jobs to America. The idea was to make American products more competitive by making Chinese imports more expensive. China, not one to back down, retaliated with tariffs of their own. They targeted American goods from soybeans to automobiles, hitting key sectors of the US economy. Fast forward through years of escalating tensions, tense negotiations, and a pandemic thrown in for good measure. And here we are. The trade war has evolved, impacting everything from global supply chains to international relations. It's 2025 and the trade war rumbles on, casting a long shadow over the global economy. The effects are being felt in markets and industries around the world. We're talking about two economic titans going toe-to-toe, and the whole world's watching. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the outcome is still uncertain. The question is, who's winning, and more importantly, who's losing? The reality is, both sides have suffered economic losses, and the ripple effects have been felt globally. Spoiler alert, it's not looking good for anyone. The trade war has led to higher prices for consumers, disrupted supply chains, and created uncertainty in global markets. Stay tuned as we break down the latest developments in this high-stakes economic showdown, and see how the rest of the world is picking sides. We'll explore the strategies, the impacts, and what the future might hold for this ongoing conflict. Trump, a self-proclaimed master negotiator, went into this trade war guns blazing. He believed that by slapping tariffs on Chinese goods, he could force China to surrender to his demands. But there's a slight problem with that strategy. It's not working. In fact, it seems to be backfiring spectacularly. Remember those manufacturing jobs Trump promised to bring back? They're not exactly lining up to come home. Instead, American businesses and consumers are feeling the pinch. Tariffs have increased the cost of imported goods from electronics to clothing, hitting American wallets hard. Farmers, once a bedrock of Trump's support, have been hammered by Chinese counter-tariffs on agricultural products. The trade war has exposed a fundamental flaw in Trump's America First approach. In a globalized world, you can't just bully your way to economic dominance. The reality is, this trade war is hurting everyone. It's creating uncertainty, disrupting supply chains, and slowing down global economic growth. So much for winning, right? The trade war between the US and China isn't just a bilateral spat, it's sending shockwaves through the entire global economy. This conflict is not merely about tariffs and trade deficits, it's a struggle for global supremacy, with each side trying to outmaneuver the other in a high-stakes game of economic chess. Imagine a delicate house of cards, meticulously built over decades of globalization. Each card represents a trade agreement, a supply chain, or an economic partnership that has been carefully placed to create a stable structure. Now imagine two toddlers, one representing the US and the other China, yanking at the base of that structure. Their actions are not just reckless but also symbolic of the larger geopolitical struggle that threatens to bring the entire house down. That's the chaos the trade war is unleashing on the world. Financial markets are in turmoil, global supply chains are being disrupted, and businesses are facing unprecedented uncertainty. Countries are caught in the crossfire, forced to choose sides or risk becoming collateral damage. Nations that once thrived on the stability of global trade are now grappling with the fallout, trying to navigate a landscape that has become increasingly hostile and unpredictable. The European Union, a traditional ally of the US, finds itself increasingly at odds with Trump's protectionist policies. The EU is struggling to maintain its own economic stability while dealing with the repercussions of a trade war it didn't start but is deeply affected by. Japan, South Korea, and other Asian economies are grappling with the fallout of disrupted supply chains and reduced demand from both China and the US. These nations are trying to adapt to a new reality where their economic growth is no longer guaranteed and their industries are facing significant challenges. Developing countries already struggling with poverty and inequality are being squeezed by the ripple effects of the trade war, from fluctuating commodity prices to reduced foreign investment. These nations are finding it increasingly difficult to sustain their economies and provide for their populations. The world is looking for leadership, stability, and a path forward. Global leaders are convening, trying to find solutions to mitigate the damage and restore some semblance of order to the international economic system. But with the US and China locked in a bitter standoff, the question remains, who will step up and fill the void? The world is in desperate need of a new leader, someone who can bridge the divide and guide us through these turbulent times. As the US retreats from its traditional role as a global leader, China is seizing the opportunity to expand its influence. The Belt and Road Initiative, a massive infrastructure project spanning across Asia, Europe, and Africa, is a testament to China's ambition to reshape the global economic order. Countries are increasingly drawn to China's promise of investment, development, and a more inclusive form of globalization. They see a country that's willing to play the long game, building partnerships and fostering cooperation rather than resorting to threats and tariffs. The trade war, ironically, has accelerated this trend. By alienating its allies and undermining its own credibility, the US has inadvertently pushed countries into China's arms. The world is witnessing a fundamental shift in the balance of power, and it's not looking good for the stars and stripes. But hey, maybe that's just what happens when you start a trade war with the world's second largest economy. Just saying. It's May 2025, and the trade war, much like a bad houseguest, is still here. Remember those Phase 1 trade deals everyone was talking about? Yeah, those are about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. The tariffs are still in place, and both sides are digging in for the long haul. But here's the thing, the battleground has shifted. It's no longer just about soybeans and steel. This new trade war is about technology, about 5G networks, artificial intelligence, and the race to dominate the industries of the future. The US is trying to cut off China's access to advanced technology, fearing that it could challenge American dominance in these key areas. But China, with its vast resources and relentless drive, is proving to be a formidable opponent. The battle lines are drawn, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The European Union, that bastion of diplomacy and compromise, is caught in a geopolitical tug-of-war. On the one hand, they share the US's concerns about China's growing economic and technological might. They're worried about unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, and China's human rights record. On the other hand, they can't afford to alienate China, a vital trading partner and a major source of investment. The EU is trying to walk a tightrope, but it's a precarious balancing act. They're facing pressure from the US to take a harder line against China, while also trying to maintain their own economic interests. It's a tough spot to be in, and there are no easy answers. Will they side with their old ally, the US, or forge a new path with the rising dragon? For decades, Africa has been seen as a pawn in the global game of chess, its resources exploited, its potential ignored. But the trade war is changing the game. China, with its Belt and Road Initiative, has been investing heavily in Africa, building infrastructure and forging strong economic ties. They're not just extracting resources, they're investing in development, creating jobs, and building partnerships. African nations, long wary of Western colonialism and hypocrisy, are increasingly receptive to China's overtures. They see a country that respects their sovereignty, understands their needs, and offers a different model of engagement. The trade war has given Africa a chance to assert its independence, to choose its own partners and chart its own course. And for the first time in a long time, the future of Africa looks bright. Section 4: Latin America, a region in play. Latin America, often seen as America's backyard, is becoming a key battleground in the trade war. China has been steadily increasing its presence in the region, investing in infrastructure, energy, and agriculture. They're signing trade deals, providing loans, and building relationships. The US, meanwhile, seems to be stuck in the past, relying on outdated policies and a heavy-handed approach. The Trump administration's focus on building a wall on the US-Mexico border, and its dismissive attitude towards Latin American leaders, has alienated many in the region. They're tired of being treated as junior partners, and are looking for new opportunities. China, with its promise of investment and respect, is offering them an alternative. The trade war has opened a door for China in Latin America, and they're not wasting any time walking through it. Section 5. The Digital Iron Curtain Splintering the Internet. Remember when the internet was supposed to bring the world closer together? Yeah, about that. The trade war is spilling over into the digital realm, threatening to fracture the internet into separate spheres of influence. The US is pressuring its allies to ban Huawei, the Chinese tech giant, from their 5G networks, citing security concerns. China in turn is building its own version of the internet, one that's heavily censored and controlled. This digital divide has far-reaching consequences. It could stifle innovation, limit access to information, and create a world where people are increasingly isolated from each other. The trade war, in its digital manifestation, is threatening to undermine the very fabric of the internet, turning it from a tool of connection into a weapon of division. And that's a scary thought for anyone who values a free and open internet. Section 1. The price of protectionism. American businesses and consumers foot the bill. Remember those Make America Great Again hats? Well, turns out they were made in China. Ironic, right? The trade war, despite its America First rhetoric, has hit American businesses and consumers squarely in the wallet. Tariffs, those pesky taxes on imported goods, have driven up prices for everything from washing machines to car parts. American businesses, already grappling with supply chain disruptions, are caught between a rock and a hard place. They can either absorb the increased costs, squeezing their profit margins, or pass them on to consumers, who are already feeling the pinch of inflation. And let's not forget about American farmers, once a reliable voting bloc for Trump, who have been hammered by retaliatory tariffs on their exports to China. The trade war, it seems, has become a game of economic hot potato, and guess who's left holding the burning spud? Section 2. China adapts and innovates, turning challenges into opportunities. While the US has been busy throwing tariff tantrums, China has been quietly adapting and innovating. See, China understands a fundamental truth about the global economy. It's not a zero-sum game. They recognize that cooperation, not confrontation, is the key to long-term prosperity. So while the US tries to build walls, both literal and metaphorical, China is building bridges to new markets, new partners, and new technologies. They're investing heavily in research and development, fostering homegrown innovation, and positioning themselves to lead in the industries of the future. The trade war, in a way, has been a blessing in disguise for China, forcing them to become more self-reliant and less dependent on the US. Section 3. A divided world order, the rise of regional blocs and shifting alliances. Remember the good old days of the post-Cold War era, when the US was the undisputed global hegemon calling all the shots? It was a time when American influence was at its peak, shaping global policies and steering international organizations. The world seemed to revolve around Washington, D.C., and the American way of life was seen as the gold standard. Yeah, those days are gone, folks. The trade war has accelerated the shift towards a multipolar world order, one where power is more diffuse and regional blocs hold increasing sway. Countries are now looking inward and forming alliances based on regional interests rather than global ones. This shift is not just about economics, it's about political influence, cultural exchange, and strategic partnerships. The European Union, despite its internal divisions, is asserting itself as a geopolitical force to be reckoned with, forging its own path on trade, climate change, and digital regulation. The EU is not just a collection of countries, it's a unified entity with its own agenda, often standing in opposition to both the US and China on various issues. From setting stringent environmental standards to leading the charge on data privacy, the EU is making its presence felt on the global stage. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, is emerging as a key player in the Indo-Pacific region, promoting economic integration and regional stability. With its strategic location and growing economies, ASEAN is becoming a focal point for trade and investment. The region's emphasis on multilateralism and collective security is helping to balance the influence of larger powers like China and the US. And the African Union is working to strengthen its internal markets and reduce its reliance on external powers. Africa's rich resources and youthful population make it a continent of immense potential. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, aims to create a single market for goods and services, boosting intra-African trade and fostering economic growth. The AU's efforts are geared towards achieving self-sufficiency and sustainable development. The trade war, by undermining US leadership and creating a vacuum on the global stage, has paved the way for these regional blocs to step up and fill the void. As the US retreats from its role as the world's policeman, other nations are seizing the opportunity to assert their own influence. This new world order is characterized by a complex web of alliances and rivalries, where regional powers play a more prominent role in shaping global affairs. The rise of these regional blocs signifies a fundamental shift in how power and influence are distributed in the 21st century. Section 4, the weaponization of finance, sanctions, tariffs, and the future of global trade. The trade war isn't just about tariffs and trade deficits, it's about the weaponization of finance. The US, with its control over the global financial system, has increasingly resorted to sanctions as a tool of economic coercion. They've slapped sanctions on countries like Iran, Venezuela, and Russia, effectively cutting them off from the global financial system. China, meanwhile, is developing alternative financial systems, such as the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, CIPS, to challenge the dominance of the US dollar. They're also promoting the use of their own currency, the yuan, in international trade and investment. The trade war has exposed the vulnerabilities of a global financial system that's heavily reliant on the US dollar and has accelerated the search for alternatives. The future of global trade, it seems, will be shaped by this battle for financial supremacy. Section 5. The environmental cost of conflict. How trade wars exacerbate climate change. You know what they say? When the economy sneezes, the environment catches a cold. The trade war, with its focus on short-term gains and nationalistic agendas, has come at a steep cost to the planet. The tariffs and trade barriers have disrupted global supply chains, leading to increased transportation distances and higher carbon emissions. The trade war has also undermined international cooperation on climate change, as countries prioritize their own economic interests over collective action. The US, under the Trump administration, withdrew from the Paris Agreement, a landmark global accord to combat climate change, sending a clear signal that environmental protection takes a back seat to economic nationalism. The trade war, in its short-sightedness, is pushing us closer to the brink of climate catastrophe. Section 6. The human toll. Behind the numbers, real people bear the brunt of economic warfare. It's easy to get caught up in the abstract numbers of the trade war. Billions of dollars in tariffs, percentage points of GDP growth, fluctuating stock market indices. But behind those numbers are real people, whose lives and livelihoods are being upended by this economic conflict. Farmers are losing their farms, factory workers are being laid off, and families are struggling to put food on the table. The trade war has exacerbated inequality, both within and between countries, as the benefits of globalization accrue to a select few, while the costs are borne by the many. It's a stark reminder that economic policies have human consequences and that the pursuit of national interest should never come at the expense of human well-being. Section 1. The allure of the yuan, a new global currency emerges. Remember the good old days when the US dollar was king? Yeah, those days are fading faster than Trump's tan after a weekend at Mar-a-Lago. The trade war, ironically, has exposed the vulnerabilities of a global financial system beholden to the greenback. Enter the yuan, China's currency, patiently waiting in the wings. With each sanction, each tariff tantrum, the yuan whispers a little louder, its appeal growing stronger. Countries are taking notice. They see the writing on the wall, the instability of a unipolar financial system. They see a China willing to invest, to lend, to create a more equitable playing field. The yuan is becoming a viable alternative, a symbol of a shifting balance of power, a quiet revolution in global finance. Tech takeover. China's digital Silk Road and the future of innovation. Remember when Silicon Valley was the undisputed center of the tech universe? Well, move over, Mark Zuckerberg. There's a new kid on the block, Shenzhen. China, once known for cheap knockoffs, is now a hotbed of technological innovation, churning out cutting-edge smartphones, artificial intelligence, and yes, even those 5G networks that have the US in a tizzy. China's digital Silk Road is weaving a web of connectivity across the globe, offering developing countries access to affordable, state-of-the-art technology. This isn't about charity, it's about strategic partnerships, about building a future where China sets the standards, writes the rules, and reaps the rewards of the digital revolution. China's appeal in the global South. For decades, developing countries have been lectured by the West, told to embrace free markets, privatization, and a healthy dose of austerity. Yet the promised prosperity often failed to materialize, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and deepening inequality. Enter China, offering a different model, a win-win approach to development. China invests in infrastructure, builds roads, bridges, and ports, creating jobs and connecting communities. They provide loans without the strings, without the demands for political reforms or economic restructuring. It's a model that resonates with countries weary of Western hypocrisy, countries seeking a path to development that doesn't involve sacrificing their sovereignty. Beyond trade, shared values and a common vision for the future, the West often portrays China as a monolithic communist behemoth, a threat to democracy and freedom. But the reality is far more nuanced. China offers a different model, one based on stability, harmony, and a long-term vision for the future. This model resonates with countries seeking an alternative to the chaos and short-termism of Western democracies. They see a China that values consensus, that prioritizes collective good over individual gain, that offers a sense of order in an increasingly uncertain world. It's a vision that's proving increasingly appealing, especially in countries disillusioned with the West's broken promises. Section 5. The soft power play culture, education and winning hearts and minds. Remember when Hollywood ruled the global box office and everyone wanted to be like Mike? Well, hold on to your popcorn, folks, because China's coming to a screen near you. From blockbuster movies to catchy pop songs, China is leveraging its soft power, using culture and education to win hearts and minds. They're establishing Confucius Institutes worldwide, offering language courses and cultural exchanges, promoting a more nuanced understanding of China's history, values and aspirations. It's a subtle but effective strategy, building bridges of understanding, fostering goodwill, and countering the often negative narratives peddled by Western media. Section 6. The American Dilemma, Confrontation or Cooperation in a Multipolar World? The U.S. finds itself at a crossroads, facing a world that no longer bends to its will. The trade war, a symptom of this larger shift, has exposed the limitations of confrontation, of trying to bully one's way to global dominance. The question now is, will the U.S. adapt to this new reality, embrace cooperation and seek common ground with China? Or will it cling to the outdated notion of American exceptionalism, risking further alienation and conflict? The choice is clear, but the path forward requires humility, pragmatism, and a recognition that the world has changed. The question is, are American leaders ready to listen? Section 1. Trump's trade tariffs, a swing and a miss. Remember when Trump promised to win the trade war, to bring China to its knees with his big beautiful tariffs? Yeah, about that. Those tariffs turned out to be about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. Instead of shrinking the trade deficit, they blew a hole in America's wallet, leaving businesses and consumers drowning in a sea of red ink. Those tariffs, touted as a way to protect American jobs, ended up costing jobs. Businesses, faced with rising costs, either had to eat the losses, lay off workers, or raise prices, passing the buck to consumers already struggling to make ends meet. So much for winning, right? Section 2. The Great American Jobs Mirage, Smoke and Mirrors on the Factory Floor. Trump's rallying cry, "Bring back our jobs," echoed through Rust Belt towns, promising a return to a bygone era of American manufacturing might. But the reality on the factory floor tells a different story. Those jobs lured overseas by cheaper labor and global supply chains weren't coming back. The trade war, far from revitalizing American manufacturing, threw a wrench in the gears, disrupting supply chains, driving up costs, and making American goods less competitive. Those few jobs that did trickle back were often low-paying, offering little security or opportunity for advancement. The promise of a manufacturing renaissance turned out to be a mirage, leaving many feeling betrayed and disillusioned. Section 3. America First, Alone in the Last, the High Cost of Isolationism. America First, the slogan that defined Trump's presidency, a rallying cry for a nation turning inward, withdrawing from the world stage. But at what cost? The trade war, a manifestation of this isolationist impulse, alienated allies, undermined global institutions, and left America isolated and adrift in a world where cooperation, not confrontation, is the only path forward. The world moved on, forging new partnerships, building new alliances, while America, consumed by its own internal divisions, retreated into a fortress of its own making. The trade war, a self-inflicted wound, weakened America's standing in the world, diminishing its influence and eroding its credibility. Section 4. Undermining global institutions, a wrecking ball to the world order. The post-World War II order, painstakingly built on a foundation of multilateralism, free trade, and international cooperation, found itself under assault during the Trump era. The trade war, a wrecking ball to this delicate edifice, chipped away at the very institutions that had long underpinned global stability and prosperity. From the World Trade Organization (WTO) to the Paris Agreement on climate change, Trump withdrew from international agreements, flouted global norms, and undermined the very foundations of a rules-based international order. The trade war, a symptom of this broader assault on multilateralism, left a legacy of distrust, division, and a world order teetering on the brink. The trade war, now in its twilight years, has left an indelible mark on the global landscape. The scars of this economic conflict run deep, shaping geopolitics, reshaping supply chains, and leaving a world on edge, grappling with the consequences of a more fractured, less predictable global order. The future remains uncertain, the path forward fraught with challenges. Will the world retreat further into protectionism, succumbing to the siren song of nationalism and economic self-interest? Or will it find a way to rebuild trust, bridge divides, and forge a new era of cooperation and shared prosperity? The legacy of Trump's trade wars hangs in the balance, a cautionary tale of the perils of economic brinkmanship and the high cost of isolationism. So here we are, at the crossroads of history. The trade war, that grand experiment in economic nationalism, has run its course, leaving a trail of broken promises and unintended consequences. It's time for a reckoning, a moment of truth for the United States. The world has changed, the balance of power shifting, the old certainties crumbling. The US can no longer dictate terms, impose its will, or expect the rest of the world to fall in line. The era of American hegemony is over. The trade war, in its own destructive way, has been a wake-up call. A stark reminder that the US cannot thrive in isolation, that its destiny is inextricably linked to the fate of the world. It's time for a course correction, a return to the principles of multilateralism, cooperation, and a recognition that in a globalized world, shared prosperity is not a zero-sum game. China, the Dragon Awakened, stands as both a beneficiary and a cautionary tale in the aftermath of the trade war. Its economic rise, once a trickle, has become a torrent, reshaping global trade, finance, and technology. The China model, with its emphasis on state-led development, long-term planning, and a willingness to invest in infrastructure and emerging markets, holds a certain allure, particularly for countries disillusioned with the West's brand of capitalism. But beneath the gleaming facade of modernity, questions linger about the sustainability of China's model. Can a system built on authoritarianism, censorship, and a disregard for human rights truly offer a viable alternative to the West? Can China maintain its economic momentum without addressing its growing social and environmental challenges? The world watches, with a mix of admiration and apprehension, as China navigates the complexities of its newfound power. The trade war has accelerated the transition to a multipolar world, where power is more diffuse, alliances more fluid, and the old rules of the game no longer apply. The US and China, once locked in a binary struggle for dominance, find themselves navigating a more complex geopolitical landscape, where regional powers, non-state actors, and even global challenges like climate change demand a more nuanced approach. The question is, will this new world order be defined by cooperation or conflict? Can the US and China find a way to coexist peacefully, to manage their differences, and to work together on shared challenges? Or will they succumb to the temptations of rivalry, leading to a new Cold War, this time with potentially catastrophic consequences? The choices made in the coming years will determine the fate of the world for generations to come. The trade war, in its own destructive way, has exposed the flaws of a hyper-globalized world, one where the pursuit of profit often trumps social justice and environmental sustainability. It has highlighted the growing inequalities within and between nations, the vulnerabilities of global supply chains, and the urgent need for a more just and equitable form of globalization. The challenge now is to reimagine globalization, to create a system that works for everyone, not just the privileged few. This means investing in education, healthcare, and infrastructure, promoting fair trade practices, and ensuring that the benefits of economic growth are shared more equitably. It means embracing sustainability, transitioning to a low-carbon economy, and protecting the planet for future generations. The trade war, in its aftermath, offers a chance to reset, to rebuild, and to create a more just and sustainable world for all.
The US-China trade war, initiated by the Trump administration in 2018, has disrupted supply chains and rattled financial markets. The US imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, citing unfair trade practices, while China retaliated with tariffs on American products. This tit-for-tat exchange has fueled global uncertainty, affecting businesses and consumers worldwide. The trade war reflects a deeper shift in global power, highlighting China's rise and the relative decline of American hegemony. The trade war's impact extends beyond the US and China, exposing the fragility of the global trading system. Countries worldwide face difficult choices navigating the competing interests of the two superpowers. The trend toward deglobalization has accelerated, with businesses seeking to shorten supply chains or bring them back home. This shift could lead to reduced efficiency, higher costs, and slower growth for the global economy. Within the US, the trade war has had mixed reactions, benefiting some sectors while hurting others. Farmers, manufacturers, and consumers have felt the pinch of higher prices and disrupted markets. Critics argue that tariffs are counterproductive, raising prices and disrupting supply chains. The trade war exposes the limitations of protectionism in a globalized world, potentially leading to economic stagnation. The BRICS nations are emerging as a counterweight to the US-led global order, promoting an alternative model of economic cooperation. They criticize the US's unilateral trade approach and strengthen their own economic ties. The trade war presents challenges and opportunities for BRICS, exposing them to negative spillovers but also creating space to increase their influence. The BRICS aim to promote a multipolar world order, reducing reliance on Western-dominated financial institutions. Trump's trade policies have drawn accusations of ulterior motives and potential illegality. Critics argue that Trump's actions benefit his businesses and those of his associates, raising questions about conflicts of interest. Instances of favorable treatment for Trump's hotels and family business deals have fueled these concerns. Critics contend that Trump's arbitrary and inconsistent trade policies undermine the rule of law and damage US credibility. Accusations of insider trading have plagued the Trump administration, with critics alleging profit from tariff announcements. Suspicious trading activity in steel and aluminum stocks before tariff announcements raised eyebrows. The administration's lack of transparency and efforts to obstruct investigations have fueled suspicions. Concerns about lobbyist influence and the revolving door between the administration and corporate lobbying firms deepen these worries. The steel and aluminum tariffs, citing national security, sparked accusations of cronyism. Critics argue the tariffs benefited companies with ties to the Trump administration. The tariffs triggered retaliatory measures from key trading partners, raising concerns about a potential trade war. The episode highlighted the administration's willingness to use national security as a justification for protectionist measures. Accusations of impropriety in Trump's trade policies became entangled in the first impeachment inquiry. The inquiry focused on Trump's efforts to pressure Ukraine to investigate political rivals while withholding military aid. Evidence suggested Trump's lawyer leveraged economic relationships for political gain. The inquiry highlighted the intertwining of personal and political interests with foreign policy and economic statecraft. The US-China trade war has sent shockwaves through the global economy, impacting businesses and consumers worldwide. The IMF has downgraded global growth forecasts, citing tariffs as a key factor. Germany, heavily reliant on exports, has been hit hard, raising fears of a broader recession in the Eurozone. The trade war has dampened business investment, contributing to slower growth and job losses. The trade war has exposed vulnerabilities in the globalized economy, disrupting supply chains. The technology sector, reliant on global supply chains, has been significantly impacted. Companies are diversifying supply chains to reduce risks, leading to higher costs and increased complexity. The trend towards diversification highlights the risks of overdependence on a single supplier, particularly China. Emerging markets have been caught in the crossfire of the US-China trade war, facing economic headwinds. The trade war has put downward pressure on commodity prices, hurting commodity exporting countries. Increased volatility in global financial markets has made it difficult for emerging markets to access capital. These countries navigate a complex geopolitical landscape, balancing relations with both the US and China. The trade war has spilled into currency markets, raising concerns about a potential currency war. The US accuses China of manipulating its currency, while China argues its movements are market-driven. The US Federal Reserve's interest rate cuts have put downward pressure on the US dollar. A currency war could lead to protectionist measures, undermining global trade and investment, and creating financial instability. Section 5, the WTO under siege, the unraveling of the global trading order. The US-China trade war has not only strained bilateral relations but also undermined the rules-based global trading system, with the World Trade Organization, WTO, at the center of the storm. The Trump administration has repeatedly criticized the WTO, accusing it of being ineffective in addressing China's unfair trade practices and biased against US interests. The US has blocked the appointment of judges to the WTO's appellate body, the organization's highest dispute settlement body, effectively paralyzing its ability to resolve trade disputes. This has created a vacuum in the global trading system, leaving countries without a neutral arbiter to adjudicate trade disputes and enforce existing rules. The Trump administration's actions have been widely condemned by other WTO members, who argue that they undermine the organization's legitimacy and threaten to unravel the rules-based trading system that has underpinned global economic growth for decades. The weakening of the WTO has created uncertainty and instability in the global trading system, leaving countries to fend for themselves and potentially leading to a resurgence of protectionism. Main Street, Blues American protests against the trade war. Across the United States, a wave of protests has erupted against the Trump administration's trade policies. Farmers, factory workers, teachers, and small business owners have taken to the streets. United by their anxieties about the future, in the heartland, farmers have organized tractorcades, driving their massive machines down city streets. They carry signs with slogans like "Tariffs hurt the heartland" and "Trade not aid." In industrial towns, factory workers have seen the trade war exacerbate their economic anxieties. Plant closures and layoffs have mounted in industries hit hard by tariffs. Union halls have become hubs of organizing against the trade war's impact. The protests have not been limited to those directly impacted by the trade war. Teachers, students, and healthcare workers have joined the demonstrations. They argue that the trade war is a distraction from more pressing domestic issues. Farmers under fire, from fields of gold to mountains of debt. The American heartland, once a bastion of support for Donald Trump, has become a battleground in the trade war as farmers bear the brunt of retaliatory tariffs imposed by China and other trading partners. Soybeans, once a lucrative export crop for American farmers, have piled up in silos, their market value plummeting as China, once the largest importer of US soybeans, turned to alternative suppliers like Brazil and Argentina. The Trump administration's attempts to mitigate the damage with billions of dollars in farm subsidies have done little to quell the anxieties of farmers, many of whom view the payments as a band-aid solution that fails to address the long-term damage inflicted by the trade war. The subsidies, they argue, are a stopgap measure that cannot replace the lost markets and broken relationships that were years in the making. The trade war has pushed many family farms, already struggling with rising debt levels and shrinking profit margins, to the brink of financial ruin. Bankruptcies and farm foreclosures have surged in farm states across the Midwest and Great Plains as farmers unable to make ends meet are forced to sell their land, often passed down through generations, to make ends meet. The rural economy, heavily dependent on agriculture, has slowed significantly, with ripple effects felt throughout rural communities. The plight of American farmers in the trade war highlights the interconnectedness of the global economy and the unintended consequences of protectionist policies. The tariffs intended to protect American jobs and industries have backfired, harming the very people they were supposed to help and undermining the economic security of rural America. Manufacturing migraines, factory closures, and job losses mount. The promise of reviving American manufacturing was a central theme of Donald Trump's presidential campaign, but the reality of the trade war has painted a far different picture for many factory workers and manufacturing communities across the United States. While the Trump administration touts the tariffs as a boon for American manufacturing, the evidence on the ground tells a more nuanced and often grim story. While some sectors, like steel and aluminum, experienced a short-lived boost in production and employment in the immediate aftermath of the tariffs, these gains have been overshadowed by the broader negative impact of the trade war on the manufacturing sector as a whole. The tariffs have increased the costs of imported inputs for manufacturers, making American-made goods less competitive in both domestic and international markets. Factory closures and layoffs have mounted in industries ranging from auto parts and appliances to machinery and electronics as companies grapple with higher costs, disrupted supply chains, and declining demand. The trade war has exacerbated existing challenges facing American manufacturing, including automation, globalization, and a shortage of skilled labor, further eroding the competitiveness of American industry. The trade war's impact on manufacturing has been particularly acute in states like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. These states, once strongholds of American manufacturing and key battlegrounds in presidential elections, have seen factory closures and job losses mount, fueling economic anxieties and political polarization. The trade war has become a potent symbol of the economic anxieties and uncertainties facing many working-class Americans. Section 4. Consumers feeling the pinch, rising prices and shrinking wallets. The US-China trade war, while often framed as a battle between governments and corporations, is ultimately a story about people, and its impact is most keenly felt in the pocketbooks of ordinary Americans. The tariffs, essentially taxes on imported goods, have rippled through the US economy, driving up prices for a wide range of consumer goods, from washing machines and refrigerators to clothing, toys, and electronics. While the Trump administration has downplayed the impact of tariffs on consumers, arguing that the costs are minimal and outweighed by the benefits of protecting American jobs, studies by economists and independent research groups paint a different picture. These studies estimate that the tariffs have cost the average American household hundreds of dollars per year in higher prices, with low-income households disproportionately affected. The trade war's impact on consumer prices has been particularly pronounced in certain sectors like agriculture and technology. The price of soybeans, a key ingredient in many processed foods, has soared due to retaliatory tariffs imposed by China, leading to higher prices for everything from tofu and soy milk to animal feed and cooking oil. Similarly, the tariffs on imported electronics and components have driven up the prices of smartphones, laptops, and other consumer electronics, impacting both household budgets and corporate profits. The trade war's impact on consumer spending, a key driver of economic growth, has been significant. Faced with rising prices and economic uncertainty, consumers have become more cautious in their spending habits, delaying major purchases and cutting back on discretionary spending. This slowdown in consumer spending has rippled through the economy, impacting businesses large and small and contributing to slower economic growth. Section 5. A house divided, the trade war deepens political polarization. The US-China trade war, far from being a purely economic issue, has become deeply enmeshed in the hyper-partisan politics of the United States, further dividing an already polarized nation. The trade war has become a rallying cry for both supporters and opponents of Donald Trump, fueling divisions along party lines and exacerbating existing political fault lines. Trump's supporters, many of whom feel left behind by globalization and economic change, view the trade war as a necessary corrective, a way to stand up to China and other trading partners that they believe have taken advantage of the United States for too long. They see the tariffs as a way to protect American jobs, revive domestic manufacturing, and restore America's economic dominance on the world stage. Trump's opponents, on the other hand, view the trade war as reckless and counterproductive, a self-inflicted wound that is harming the US economy, alienating allies, and undermining the rules-based global trading system. They argue that the tariffs are hurting American businesses and consumers, raising prices, disrupting supply chains, and jeopardizing economic growth. They see the trade war as a symptom of Trump's go-it-alone approach to foreign policy, which they believe is weakening America's standing in the world. The trade war has become a wedge issue in American politics, exploited by both parties to mobilize their bases and demonize their opponents. The debate over the trade war has been characterized by misinformation, hyperbole, and a lack of nuanced understanding of the complex issues at play. The trade war has become a proxy for broader debates about globalization, American power, and the future of the international order. Section 1. BRICS, a new dawn in the East. As the US-China trade war disrupts the global order, a new dynamic is emerging. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are seizing the opportunity to assert their influence. They are increasingly acting as rule makers, shaping a multipolar world. The BRICS offer a vision of a more equitable global order. They have created institutions like the New Development Bank, challenging the dominance of the World Bank and IMF. Despite internal divisions, their shared interest in reshaping the global order drives cooperation. Section 2. China's calculated maneuvers, forging alliances and expanding influence. China, the world's second-largest economy, is at the heart of BRICS influence. The trade war has pushed China to reduce its dependence on the US and establish dominance in Asia. China has retaliated with tariffs and diversified its trading partners. The Belt and Road Initiative is key to expanding China's influence. China has strengthened political and security ties with BRICS partners. Its rise challenges US hegemony, creating new alliances and reshaping global power. Section 3. BRICS, a counter-narrative to Western hegemony. The BRICS nations represent a powerful counter-narrative to the Western-centric view of the world. Their rise challenges the notion that Western values are universal, offering alternative models of development and governance. The BRICS emphasize national sovereignty, non-interference, and multilateralism. They advocate for a more equitable distribution of power and resources in the global system. Promoting South-South cooperation, they seek to reduce dependence on the West. The BRICS vision of a multipolar world represents a significant departure from the unipolar moment. Section 4, The Road Ahead, a multipolar world takes shape. The US-China trade war has accelerated the transition to a multipolar world, a world where power is more diffuse, alliances are more fluid, and no single country or bloc of countries can dictate the terms of global engagement. This new world order is characterized by both cooperation and competition, as countries seek to advance their interests in a more complex and interconnected world. The rise of the BRICS is a defining feature of this multipolar world. The BRICS nations, with their growing economic might, political influence, and demographic weight, are reshaping the global balance of power. They are challenging the dominance of the West, offering alternative models of development and governance, and forging new alliances that bypass traditional power structures. The road ahead in this multipolar world is fraught with uncertainty. The US-China rivalry, if not managed carefully, could escalate into a new Cold War, dividing the world into competing blocs and stifling global cooperation on pressing issues like climate change, pandemics, and nuclear proliferation. The rise of nationalism, populism, and protectionism also threatens to undermine the rules-based international order that has underpinned global peace and prosperity for decades. However, the multipolar world also presents opportunities for cooperation and progress. The BRICS nations, with their emphasis on multilateralism and dialogue, could play a constructive role in bridging divides and fostering cooperation on shared challenges. The growing interconnectedness of the global economy creates incentives for countries to find common ground and work together to address common threats. The future of the multipolar world will be shaped by the choices that countries make today, whether to embrace cooperation or succumb to division and conflict. The US-China trade war has exposed the shifting global balance of power. The unipolar moment of US dominance is fading, replaced by a fragmented multipolar world. This transition presents opportunities for a more equitable global order. The trade war reveals the limits of US unilateral actions. China, emboldened by its economic might, challenges US dominance. This assertive China is a force to be reckoned with. The trade war's effects extend beyond the US and China. Traditional alliances are strained by the dispute. The EU struggles to balance ties with the US and China. Developing countries gain leverage in global negotiations. The shifting sands of global power create anxieties and possibilities. The potential for conflict is real as powers adjust, yet this flux offers a chance for a more stable global order. The US-China trade war highlights the dangers of protectionism in a global economy. Tariffs and trade barriers harm businesses, consumers, and workers on both sides. Nations cannot prosper in isolation. Global flows drive growth. The casualties are many. Farmers and factory workers face lost markets and jobs. Consumers worldwide feel the pinch of rising prices. The trade war erodes trust and cooperation. It fuels nationalism and protectionism. The legacy is a cautionary tale for policymakers. Embrace openness and cooperation for sustained prosperity. The US-China trade war has opened space for other global actors to assert themselves, challenging the West's dominance in global governance. The BRICS nations are at the forefront of this reimagining, offering a vision of a more multipolar world. They challenge Western-dominated institutions like the IMF and World Bank and call for UN Security Council reforms. The BRICS aim to create a more equitable global order. Their success will shape the future of global governance. The US-China trade war has accelerated the world's transition to a multipolar order, a complex and evolving landscape where power is more diffuse, alliances are more fluid, and no single country or bloc of countries can dictate the terms of global engagement. This new world order presents both opportunities and challenges, demanding creativity, adaptability, and a willingness to embrace a more nuanced and inclusive approach to international relations. In a multipolar world, the zero-sum mentality that characterized the Cold War era is no longer tenable. The challenges facing humanity in the 21st century, climate change, pandemics, terrorism, cyber warfare, transcend national borders and require collective action to address effectively. No single country, however powerful, can solve these problems alone. The multipolar world demands a new paradigm of global governance, one based on dialogue, cooperation, and a shared commitment to addressing common challenges. Navigating the uncertain terrain of a multipolar world will require deft diplomacy, a willingness to build bridges across cultural and ideological divides, and a commitment to multilateral institutions and rules-based order. It will also require a recognition that power is not a zero-sum game and that cooperation, rather than confrontation, offers the best hope for achieving shared goals. The multipolar world is still taking shape, its contours fluid and its future uncertain. The choices that countries make today, whether to embrace cooperation or succumb to division, whether to uphold the rules-based order or retreat into nationalism and protectionism, will determine the course of the 21st century and beyond. The stakes are high, but so too are the possibilities for a more peaceful, just and prosperous world.